It began like so many dark chapters in history, quietly, no alarms, no headlines, no midnight knocks on the door. Just the low hiss of fire, the flutter of scorched paper in the air, and the dull hum of a government making sure no one would ever find out. This isn't a conspiracy theory, it's a reality buried beneath decades of classified files and silent witnesses. And here's the question we need to ask. What kind of truth is so dangerous that those in power would rather set it ablaze than let it be known? Welcome to the hidden corridors of history, where evidence doesn't just go missing, it's systematically erased. This is block one of our deep dive into one of the most chilling ideas of our time, the deliberate destruction of truth by those sworn to protect it. Let's set the stage. In the 1960s, at the height of Cold War paranoia, the US government carried out a covert operation codenamed Project Sunshine. On the surface, it sounded innocent, even poetic. But in reality, it involved the secret collection of human remains, often those of infants without family consent, to study the effects of nuclear fallout. When news of the project eventually surfaced, the outrage was immediate. But here's what most people never knew. Thousands of documents related to Project Sunshine mysteriously disappeared. Witnesses spoke of entire warehouses of records being burned. Scientists and officials were silenced, transferred, or simply retired. So, let's ask again. Why destroy evidence instead of defending it? One answer, plausible deniability. If the paper trail vanishes, so does accountability, and Project Sunshine was just the beginning. Across decades, across continents, governments, democratic and authoritarian alike, have perfected the art of erasure. From shredded documents to deleted tapes to entire archives accidentally going up in flames. It's not always a dramatic scene with men in trench coats. Sometimes it's just a clerk who's following orders. One infamous example is the Iran-Contra affair of the 1980s. While the headlines focused on weapons and covert funding to Nicaraguan rebels, behind the scenes, government officials were frantically destroying documents. Emails disappeared. Hard drives were wiped. Oliver North himself admitted to shredding evidence in his office for days, and yet no one stopped him. Because sometimes the system protects itself more fiercely than it protects the truth. Let's bring it closer to home. Ever heard of the Tuskegee syphilis study? For 40 years, yes, 40. Black men in Alabama were left untreated for syphilis so researchers could observe the disease. Even after penicillin became the standard treatment, the study continued. When it was exposed in 1972, the government apologized, but what they didn't tell you is that much of the internal documentation had already been destroyed or sealed. The story we were told was incomplete by design, sanitized, and this pattern isn't limited to the United States. In the United Kingdom, there's the case of the Windrush scandal. In 2010, the UK government admitted to destroying thousands of landing cards, documents that proved the legal immigration status of Caribbean-born citizens who arrived after World War II. Without those papers, many were wrongfully detained or deported. And what was the explanation for the destruction? Administrative efficiency. Is that what truth is worth now? A more organized filing system? It makes you wonder, how many more truths have vanished behind the label of routine procedure? And here's the thing, it's not always the big, flashy scandals that hold the darkest secrets. Sometimes the smallest fires burn the most important pages. Let's talk about the Library of Congress fire of 1851. More than 35,000 books and countless government documents were lost in what was officially declared an accident. But historians have long questioned the timing. Why? Because the fire conveniently destroyed early census data, including records of enslaved populations and economic statistics that could have redefined our understanding of antebellum America. Coincidence? Maybe. But patterns don't lie. Because when you see this strategy repeated across different governments, different eras, different crises, you realize something chilling. The destruction of evidence is not the exception. It's the playbook, and we, the public, are left piecing together charred fragments, redacted files, and unanswered questions. Let's circle back to that original image, a fire burning quietly in the dark. It's not just a metaphor. In 2007, A mysterious fire broke out at the National Archives of Iraq, consuming countless records from the Saddam Hussein regime. Some of those documents had been under U.S. control, others contained damning information about war crimes, oil deals, and political manipulation. And yet, no independent investigation ever reached a conclusive answer. We're told to trust that it was all accidental, but how many accidents does it take before we recognize a pattern? The erasure of evidence isn't always about hiding past mistakes. Sometimes it's about controlling the future narrative. If you can destroy the proof, you can rewrite the story. You can shape how generations remember an event, or forget it entirely. And this leads us to a more haunting question. What truths have already been lost forever? We know about the scandals that got leaked, the whistleblowers who risked everything, the journalists who fought to reveal what was hidden, but how many stories never made it past the flames? How many facts were never written down in the first place? What if the greatest cover-ups are the ones we don't even know existed? Think about the digital age. Today, deleting something doesn't require gasoline. It just takes a few keystrokes. Whole archives can vanish in seconds. Entire datasets can be scrubbed from servers. Metadata can be altered. History rewritten in real time. And when those doing the deleting have the authority to define what's classified, we lose not just information, we lose the ability to question. So, what can we do? That's the urgent dilemma at the heart of this story. Block 2 will explore the mechanics of modern erasure, how governments and institutions destroy, distort, or suppress evidence in the digital era, and how citizens, journalists, and truth seekers are fighting back. Make sure you subscribe, like this video, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next chapter. If we want to protect the truth, we first have to find out where it was last seen. Imagine this: a government worker alone in a dusty archive room, quietly feeding sensitive documents into an incinerator. No headlines, no investigations, no questions, just silence and smoke. How many truths have vanished in flames? But why? Would a government destroy its own records, especially if it had nothing to hide? In this block, we'll unravel real historical moments where official files were not just misplaced, they were intentionally erased, and in some cases, these weren't just bureaucratic mistakes, they were operations, systematic, deliberate, choreographed acts of silence. Let's start with one of the most damning examples, Operation Paperclip. After World War II, the US secretly recruited over 1,600 German scientists, many of whom had deep ties to the Nazi regime. Wernher von Braun, yes, the man who became a hero at NASA, had built V-2 rockets used to bomb London. He was brought to America, scrubbed clean by classified files, and turned into a poster boy for American innovation. But what about his victims? The records detailing his involvement in forced labor camps were hidden, redacted, or outright destroyed. Some historians believe the scale of this cover-up was so vast that entire archives were emptied. Why? Because admitting the truth would shatter the myth of American moral high ground during the Cold War. This isn't an isolated incident. Across decades and continents, governments have mastered the art of disappearing their own secrets. Take Project MKUltra, a CIA-led mind control program that sounds more like a sci-fi thriller than a real operation. The CIA experimented on unwitting civilians using LSD, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, and even torture. When Congress started asking questions in the 1970s, then CIA Director Richard Helms ordered all MKUltra documents destroyed. Thousands of pages gone. Only a few boxes survived, found by accident in a financial archive. If that discovery hadn't happened, MKUltra might still be dismissed today as conspiracy theory. How many programs like it simply disappeared successfully? This leads to a chilling realization. When the evidence is burned, the narrative is up for grabs. Governments know that controlling the past is a form of power. If you destroy the documents, you control the story. And if no one notices, even better. Third, Guatemalan Civil War offers another painful example. During a brutal conflict from the 1960s to the 1990s, the Guatemalan government, backed at times by the CIA, carried out massacres of indigenous communities. As the war ended, large caches of military and police files vanished. Activists and journalists believe they were deliberately incinerated to erase war crimes. Why destroy the truth? Because what's left can be rewritten. The U.S. Army's Vietnam War Crimes Working Group files were also subject to suppression. These documents cataloged hundreds of cases of misconduct, rapes, torture, massacres that were reported, investigated, and then buried, not publicly acknowledged, not punished. Many of the records were declassified only decades later, and some were never found. Where did they go? We need to ask, how much of history is missing? If you think this only happens during war or covert operations, think again. Sometimes even domestic tragedies are scrubbed clean. Let's talk about Tulsa, 1921, one of the worst incidents of racial violence in U.S. history. A prosperous black neighborhood known as Black Wall Street was bombed and burned by white mobs. Hundreds were killed, thousands displaced. For decades, official reports ignored or downplayed the massacre. Records vanished. Survivors' testimonies were dismissed. It wasn't until the late 20th century that serious efforts were made to uncover what really happened. But imagine the truth we'll never get back. Here's the core issue. Documents are fragile, but they are also powerful. They shape memory. When the paper trail ends in ash, accountability dies with it, and this goes beyond governments. Corporations have followed similar playbooks. Consider DuPont, the chemical giant. For decades, it knowingly released toxic perfluorooctanoic acid, PFOA, also known as C8, into water supplies. Internal memos showed they were aware of health risks as early as the 1960s, but they didn't act. Instead, they buried the studies, destroyed incriminating documents, and denied liability until a whistleblower exposed them. How many corporate crimes have never been punished because the paperwork was incinerated before the public even knew? To look, now pause, ask yourself, what else has been lost? There's an old saying, history is written by the victors. But in our modern world, it's often rewritten by bureaucrats with shredders, and it's not just old history that's at stake. In 2009, the UK's Ministry of Defence admitted to destroying thousands of UFO-related documents, despite promising public disclosure. Whether you believe in aliens or not, this act of destruction symbolized something deeper, a pattern, a fear of transparency. They didn't just lose the files, they chose to delete a part of history. So what happens when a society starts accepting document destruction as routine? The public stops asking questions. People forget what was lost. Curiosity is replaced with apathy. This is where the real danger lies. We're not just talking about burnt paper, we're talking about burnt truth. Once gone, it can't be reconstructed. Eyewitnesses die, memories fade, and all that's left is silence. The kind governments find very convenient. Let's pivot back to the US for a moment. In the aftermath of 9/11, millions of classified documents were moved, hidden, or destroyed under the banner of national security. Some of these were legitimate actions meant to protect ongoing operations, but others? Well, we may never know. Whistleblowers have suggested that pre-9/11 warnings, failed intelligence, and policy mistakes were quietly scrubbed from the record to preserve reputations, not to protect the people, but to protect power. And this brings us to a hard truth. Sometimes what's missing tells us more than what's there. Look at any scandal, any injustice, and ask, where are the documents? Where are the logs, the transcripts, the photographs? If they're gone, who made them disappear? And why? Because once you destroy the paper trail, you also destroy the path to justice. And here's where the story twists. What if some governments don't just burn documents, but fabricate new ones? In Soviet Russia, falsification was an art form. Leaders were airbrushed out of photos, files were rewritten, entire people disappeared not just from life, but from official history. This isn't fiction. This is the consequence of unchecked power. So what can we do? How do we resist a world where truth can be deleted with fire? We start by remembering, by asking questions, by refusing to accept that the past is lost just because the files are. Because truth, once revealed, is contagious, but only if someone notices. In the next block, we'll explore modern-day whistleblowers, the risks they take, and the forces trying to silence them. We'll see how people are fighting back and why, in today's world, the battle over information is more dangerous than ever. But before we move on, do this one thing. Subscribe to the channel, share this video, and tell someone you know that. History is under attack. We can't bring back what was burned, but we can stop the next fire before it starts. Imagine finding a piece of information so damning, so dangerous that simply possessing it could ruin your life or end it. What would you do? Hide it? Reveal it? Or would you become the next victim of a force determined to erase it? Block 3 begins with a question. What happens to the people who uncover truths the government doesn't want exposed? Throughout history, whistleblowers, journalists, and insiders have stumbled across forbidden knowledge. Some speak out, others are silenced, but when the truth threatens the powerful, it often disappears along with those who dare to expose it. Let's talk about Karen Silkwood, a worker at the Kerr-McGee plutonium plant in Oklahoma in the 1970s. She began documenting unsafe practices at the facility: missing plutonium, poor safety protocols, employee contamination. She gathered files, prepared to meet a journalist, but on the way to the meeting, she died in a mysterious car crash. The documents she carried, gone, never recovered. Officially, it was an accident. Unofficially, a warning. Then there's Gary Webb, the journalist who uncovered connections between the CIA and cocaine trafficking in the U.S. His reports suggested that the agency turned a blind eye to drug smuggling that fueled the crack epidemic in American cities. He was discredited, ridiculed, and eventually found dead from 2 gunshot wounds to the head. Ruled a suicide. How does a man shoot himself in the head? Twice? We can't ignore the Clinton-era whistleblowers like Ron Brown, the former Commerce Secretary who allegedly had knowledge of covert trade deals. He died in a plane crash, but the coroner found a hole in his head consistent with a gunshot wound. No autopsy was performed. Accidents, suicides, misfortunes. They pile up, and it's not just individuals. Sometimes entire events vanish from history. Do you remember the 1989 U.S. invasion of Panama? Officially a quick mission to capture Manuel Noriega. But eyewitnesses reported mass casualties, civilian deaths, entire neighborhoods burned. The government claimed fewer than 500 casualties. Locals say it was thousands. Who's right? We may never know. Because again, the records burned, sealed, erased. This leads us to the National Archives fire of 1973. It destroyed 16 to 18 million military personnel files. 1/3 of Army records from 1912 to 1960, gone, just like that. A fire with no sprinkler system, no backup copies, no investigation into arson. Why were so many veteran records lost forever, and what secrets were buried with them? Here's the disturbing pattern. The people who know too much, the records that hold too much, and the evidence that threatens too much, they all have a way of disappearing, sometimes literally. Sometimes with a well-timed fire, crash, or leak. Let's talk about Project MKUltra again. Yes, we've mentioned it before, but now we dig deeper. After the Watergate scandal, the CIA began shredding files. But some MKUltra documents survived, giving us a glimpse into a dark world of mind control experiments on unwitting citizens. LSD dosages, hypnosis, psychological torture. But here's the catch. Most of the files were destroyed in 1973 under orders from then CIA Director Richard Helms. The public only learned of MKUltra because a few budget documents slipped through the cracks. Imagine what we never saw. In a truly democratic society, transparency is sacred, but secrecy breeds control. When governments destroy evidence, they rewrite history, they erase accountability, they bury their crimes. Let's revisit COINTELPRO, the FBI's program to disrupt civil rights groups in the 1960s and 70s. It used surveillance, infiltration, and misinformation against leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. The FBI tried to blackmail him, even suggesting suicide. This wasn't a rogue agent, it was a policy, and it remained hidden until activists broke into an FBI office in Media, Pennsylvania, and uncovered the documents by sheer luck. Had they not done so, we'd never know. So how many other operations were buried successfully? What programs are running right now that we'll never hear about? Here's something even more chilling. Operation Northwoods. This was a plan proposed by the U.S. Department of Defense in the early 1960s. It involved staging terrorist attacks on American soil to justify war with Cuba, real casualties, false flags. all to manipulate public opinion. The plan was never enacted, but it was approved at the highest levels. How many similar plans were carried out and never revealed? We only know about Northwoods because of the Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, a tool that allows citizens to request government records, but even FOIA has limits. Documents are often heavily redacted, entire pages blacked out, and if something was destroyed, it's as if it never existed. This brings us to a key figure, John Greenwald, founder of the Black Vault. He's filed over 10,000 FOIA requests and has built one of the largest private archives of declassified government documents. Thanks to his efforts, we know about secret spy satellites, failed missile programs, and unidentified aerial phenomena. But Greenwald has a warning. The more they give you, the more you realize how much they're hiding. So what's the endgame? Is it just about national security or something more? Power thrives in darkness. When evidence is burned, deleted, or buried, it's not just about hiding a mistake. It's about maintaining dominance, control over truth, control over memory, control over the future. Here's what we know. Countless whistleblowers have died under mysterious circumstances. Millions of files have been lost in fires, crashes, and purges. Official narratives rarely match eyewitness accounts. And here's what: we don't know. How much history has been erased? How many secrets are locked away? And how far will they go to keep us from the truth? In Block 4, we'll dive into modern cover-ups still unfolding, digital censorship, classified leaks, and the tech that now plays a role in hiding history. So stay with us, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. We're just getting started. Imagine waking up in a world where truth exists somewhere, but it's been buried beneath a mountain of misinformation, digital manipulation, and algorithms built to hide it. You search, you scroll, you dig, but what you need to see is missing. Welcome to the modern age of censorship. The key question now is, how is technology being used to silence dissent, erase records, and rewrite history in real time? Let's start with the role of big tech companies. Platforms like Google, Facebook, X, formerly Twitter, and YouTube control the flow of information more tightly than any government in history. Their algorithms decide what you see and what you don't. Whistleblowers like Frances Haugen, formerly of Facebook, revealed how the company knowingly amplified harmful content for profit. But more alarming, how they silenced certain political discussions or protests by tweaking algorithms or outright banning pages. Then there's the rise of shadow banning, when a user isn't technically banned, but their reach is secretly limited. Your posts vanish from feeds. Your videos stop appearing in search. No explanation, no appeal. And what about deplatforming? Voices that question official narratives on wars, pandemics, elections are wiped from the internet. Some deserved? Maybe. But when platforms become judge, jury, and executioner, where's the line? Enter Edward Snowden, who exposed the NSA's global surveillance program. His leaks revealed just how much information governments collect on their citizens: emails, calls, location data. Instead of being hailed as a hero, Snowden was branded a traitor. He lives in exile to this day. Julian Assange is another name. Through WikiLeaks, he published classified materials showing war crimes, political espionage, and global corruption. Governments didn't dispute the authenticity, they targeted the source. Assange has been imprisoned, silenced, and used as an example of what happens when you pull back the curtain. In 2020, during the height of the pandemic, a major story about Hunter Biden's laptop was published by the New York Post. It was immediately flagged as misinformation, blocked on Twitter, and labeled as Russian disinfo. Months later, it was verified, but by then, the damage was done. The narrative had been set, and the idea that truth can be edited in real time had become terrifyingly clear. Digital evidence is more fragile than paper ever was. Files can be deleted, emails scrubbed, footage deep-faked, and the line between truth and fiction becomes almost impossible to trace. Governments have even begun rewriting official websites. Internet Archive, or the Wayback Machine, has captured before and after versions of pages that were quietly edited or removed, particularly regarding public health, military actions, or foreign policy. Even Wikipedia, often seen as neutral, has been subject to manipulation. Editors with political agendas can reshape entries. Sources can be deemed unreliable and wiped from citations. All of this leads to a chilling realization. We are living through history that is being edited as it unfolds. And here's a deeper layer that often goes unnoticed: automated moderation. AI systems now scan and flag content across the internet, often with little human oversight. These machines are programmed with guidelines, but those guidelines are shaped by human bias, corporate interest, and political influence. YouTube's automated copyright strikes, TikTok's invisible violations, Facebook's AI removals, all of them wield incredible power with zero transparency. The machine doesn't just watch us, it erases us. Then there's the issue of data voids, a term used to describe topics with very little accurate information available online. When someone searches for controversial or emerging topics, the first results are often misleading, biased, or manipulated by fringe groups exploiting the gap. In essence, when the truth is scarce, falsehoods flourish. Some governments have taken this further by creating troll farms and digital propaganda machines. These are not theories, they're documented. The Internet Research Agency in Russia, for example, conducted widespread campaigns to distort public opinion in the US and Europe, posing as real users on social media platforms. China has perfected the model of digital authoritarianism. Through the Great Firewall, they control every piece of online content. Citizens are not just censored, they are monitored in real time. Every search, every post, every word can have consequences, and yet the West isn't immune. Laws framed as protective, like combating disinformation, can easily slide into full-blown censorship. The EU's Digital Services Act and similar efforts globally are raising questions. Who decides what is disinformation, and what happens when the truth is inconvenient? Let's not forget the role of corporate lobbying. Tech companies and powerful industries often influence legislation that shapes what can or cannot be said online. This isn't about protecting people, it's about protecting profits and narratives. We've also seen how fact-checkers, once trusted, can become tools of narrative control. While many operate with integrity, others are funded by organizations with vested interests. If one version of the truth is constantly being elevated and others suppressed, are we really informed? This all brings us to a terrifying but essential point. Truth is not only under attack, it's being redesigned. Imagine students 100 years from now learning about today's world from censored textbooks, AI-generated history, and narratives. Shaped not by witnesses, but by data scientists. Will they ever know what really happened? We are the last generation with analog memory. The last generation who knew life before the cloud, before deep fakes, before reality became optional. If we don't act, if we don't document, preserve, and question relentlessly, we'll lose not just the truth, but our right to even search for it. In Block 5, we'll connect all of this to the broader power structure. Why do governments and corporations invest so heavily in control? What are they hiding? And what can we do to fight back? Don't miss it. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss the truth. Let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture. We've seen how events were erased, how digital footprints vanish, how whistleblowers are silenced. But the real question now is, why? Why does this relentless effort to bury the truth exist? The answer may lie in one word: control. Control over people, over narratives, over the future itself. Imagine if the public truly understood the extent of corruption, of lies, of historical revisionism. The entire foundation of trust in our institutions would collapse overnight. Chaos would follow, or at least that's the justification often used by those in power. Governments and corporations don't just want to avoid embarrassment, they fear revolution. Let's go back to one revealing example: the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. For 40 years, the US public health service let black men suffer untreated syphilis just to study its effects. When the truth came out, it shook the country. Imagine how many other experiments like this never came to light. How many were erased before they could spark outrage? Consider the COINTELPRO operations by the FBI. These were covert projects to infiltrate and discredit civil rights leaders, anti-war activists, and even Martin Luther King Jr. His home was bugged. He received anonymous letters urging him to commit suicide, all under the banner of national security. These weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a pattern of protecting power at any cost. When the Iraq War began, it was justified by claims of weapons of mass destruction, claims that were later proven false. Journalists who questioned the narrative were attacked or ignored. Decades later, we're still feeling the consequences. And still, those who led us into war haven't faced justice. Ask yourself this: if governments are willing to lie on such massive scales, what else have they buried? We've heard of Operation Northwoods, a U.S. military plan in the 1960s that proposed staging fake terrorist attacks on American soil to justify a war with Cuba. It was never enacted, but it made it to the president's desk. What if one day a similar plan wasn't stopped? What if one already wasn't? Many believe the Patriot Act, passed after 9/11, opened the door to mass surveillance and civil liberties, erosion under the guise of safety. Fear was weaponized, and dissent became dangerous. Every time a whistleblower speaks out, whether Snowden, Assange, or the countless unnamed, they're met not with applause, but with persecution. Why? Because they threaten the illusion that everything is under control, that those in charge deserve to be, that we're safer not knowing the full story. But this illusion has cracks. Look at the modern world. Protests erupting across continents, youth movements calling out climate inaction, racial injustice, economic disparity. And behind each uprising is a growing awareness. We've been lied to. Repeatedly. Systematically. And now a new frontier is emerging: AI and digital history manipulation. Imagine a future where AI writes our textbooks, curates our news feeds, even generates realistic fake videos of past events. Who controls that AI? Who trains it? What biases, what omissions are built into the code? We are standing at the edge of a digital dark age, one where truth is programmable. If the past can be rewritten, the present can be shaped. And the future belongs only to those who control the narrative. So what can we do? It starts with awareness, with questioning everything, with demanding transparency, supporting independent journalism, archive everything, back up the evidence. Don't let stories vanish, and most importantly, speak up. Truth survives only when it's spoken, repeated, protected, because once it's gone, it's gone. Let this video be a spark for those who believe that truth matters. And if you're one of them, if you believe in digging deeper, in challenging the official version, then subscribe to In Today's World. Share this video. Let others ask the hard questions too, because maybe, just maybe, if enough of us speak, they won't be able to silence us all.